You're ruining my childhood. Or are they? Hey everyone, Phil here. I just finished watching the 10 episode run of Batman Caped Crusader on Amazon Prime, and I feel compelled to talk about it. And hopefully, you've already watched it by now because this is not going to be spoiler free. I'm going to be talking about things that may ruin the show for you if you haven't seen it already. So go watch the show and then come back and watch this review video. 3 years ago, I made a documentary feature film about Batman the Animated Series, which I totally recommend you watch. And it felt like this was a very appropriate thing for me to talk about. So I'm going to tell you everything I think. I was very surprised as to how I felt after the show was completed. And before we get started into the details, I just want to say animation takes a lot of work. It takes a big team of people, a lot of time and energy and planning, and years of production. So your opinions are totally valid, but please be mindful that the art that goes into making something like this is a lot. There's stuff that I really love, and it's paired with stuff that I don't. And so I can't say any real blanket statements. I can't say this is garbage and I can't say this is the best thing ever. It's a little bit of both. And a lot of things in life are a little bit of both. So we just kind of have to, uh, pick the things you like and focus on those. And when I made myself a list of all the things that I really like about this series, the list of things I like is longer than the list of things I do not like. And so for that reason, I have an overall positive impression of this series. Okay, so with all that said, let's get into it. All right. So there's a 10 episode run. It's on Amazon Prime Video. And first of all, is this show going to ruin your childhood? That's probably the number one question on people's minds. And the answer is no, of course it isn't. You can go back and watch Batman the Animated Series anytime you want. This show is a sort of spiritual successor to Batman the Animated Series. It does take place in the 1930s and 40s, somewhere thereabouts. Um, the original Batman the Animated Series was, of course, broadcast in 1992, but it took place in an undefined time. You know, they had technology, they had computers, but the cars were older and the outfits, the clothing was older. So it was sort of a world without boundaries of time. This show is different. It is absolutely a period piece from the film noir aspect to it to the dialogue. A lot of the male characters speak as if they were in an old detective film. And so, in that sense, it feels very true to the genre of film noir, which is great because the original Batman the Animated Series definitely has film noir roots. But that show had some creative licensing that it went on with, and so it wasn't completely a period piece. This is definitely a period piece. The film noir is in full form. The ambiance is just absolutely incredible. And so let's talk about all the things that I thought were really good about this show. I want to focus on the positive first. Don't worry, there's some things I don't like quite so much, and we'll get to those too. First of all, is the ambiance. The ambiance is incredible. Um, the way that the lighting is set up, you get the classic blinds over the windows, so there's like the slats of light that hit a character's face. Um, Lots of interesting like camera angles, fog. They really do an excellent job creating a strong sense of mood. And I will say, for me, that is probably one of the strongest aspects of this new series. So the original Batman the Animated Series was serialized, meaning it had not a full continuity from episode to episode. There was a little bit of that. If you go back to Pretty Poison, you have Harvey Dent before he was Two-Face, and he's dating Poison Ivy before she becomes Poison Ivy. But this 10 episode first season of Caped Crusader very much plays in order, and I would highly recommend watching it in complete order. And also trying to reserve some of your judgment of things until the very end. I'll tell you right now, there were some things that bothered me. We'll get back to the things that bothered me later, but I will say that the things that bothered me, some of them ended up getting resolved by the end of the 10th episode. So just hang in there and watch the whole thing before you make your final decision. Clothing seems to be rooted in a more traditional 40s style, and you get a little bit of what looks like the beginnings of zoot suits, and the villain costumes are fantastic. Everyone's dressed really well, and I just have nothing but good things to say about the clothing. So it's also a very slick design in general. Like the series is designed just very clean lines. Occasionally in the original animated series, some of the characters would get bulkier than maybe they needed to be, and it would look a little bit clumsy. And as that series went on, they trimmed things up, especially when they got into the new Batman adventures. That's when they really trimmed everybody up, and things got very angular. This show, Caped Crusader, seems to find a really good balance between the original art style of the animated series and the new Batman adventures that came after that. So music is composed by Frederick Weidman. You may know him from The Dragon Prince over on Netflix. He was an excellent choice. There's a real sense of urgency and seriousness that is like underpinning the entire series. In fact, the music does a fantastic job of doing what I believe the writing is already doing in this series, which is this ain't your, Saturday morning cartoon Batman. This is a very serious take on Batman, especially a Batman in animation. So, whereas the original animated series uh, was an after school sort of a thing, this show, it's on Prime, and the concerns around uh, any old kid finding it might not be as much as they were, because darn it, we've got guns, we've got adult language, and people are getting killed, folks. They're not pulling any punches. So part of the issue with the original animated series was this tug of war between the creators and broadcast standards and practices. So in order to have a show be acceptable to air on, uh, you know, regular, what used to be regular TV channels, back then would be Fox Kids. In order to have a show make it onto that, you had to appease these standards so that you weren't making anything that would be too violent or too offensive to parents and children. It seems as if that's no longer the case on this new platform for Prime Video. I will also say that's not something to completely hang your hat on as a show. You have to have good writing, you have to have good stories, and all the other elements need to be there. It can't just be hooray violence. But that being said, there's a little bit of hooray violence because, it's a gangster type show, and you've got a superhero, even though he's not a super powered hero, he's still a hero, and you want him to be able to feel like he can be the vigilante that he needs to be and not be restricted by broadcast standards and practices. The storyboarding that went into this show, you can tell it's being treated like a classic dramatic film of the film noir era. We've got a lot of really intense close-ups and dramatic angles. They're handling it in a very mature way, and the style is really lovely. It does feel like a tribute to the 40s. So I'm going to give them, my seal of approval on the storyboarding of this series. One of the things that they do that I kind of love, if you look at older films from the 50s and the 40s, one of the things that is pretty prevalent is holding on to a shot um, until maybe a character walks almost completely off camera or completely down a path into the background, and the camera just kind of holds onto it. And one of the things I love about those kinds of shots is it really gives you a chance as an audience to maintain focus on one thing and really think about what you're looking at, and it maybe gives you more time to wonder what the actor is considering or the character is considering. Well, they do that here in Caped Crusader. They don't really need to do that. There aren't actors taking, long beats to consider things because it's animated, but they really imbue a sense of maturity with those kinds of shots. So it's a little bit more subtle, and maybe it's something that people won't notice the first time around, but keep an eye out for those kinds of things because they do make a difference with pacing and mood. And I think that's where this series is really shining for me. Voice cast is pretty darn solid. I don't have a lot of notes, and the notes that I do have, I will save for a little bit later in this video, uh, because there's some voices that I don't particularly love. But on the whole, I will say the voice casting was really great. Some highlights for me, I'm gonna say Hamish Linklater does a really good Batman. I wasn't initially sure how I felt about his Batman. Obviously, the problem with a show like this is trying to live up to the legacy of Batman the Animated Series, and of course, actors like Kevin Conroy. Let's be clear, Hamish Linklater does not replace Kevin Conroy. That being said, he's got a very good, raspy, um, ominous tone. And what I love about this Batman is he really does seem to be dreary, but I kind of like a dreary Batman because this is not a character that should be happy-go-lucky. Um, so they really capture that sense of heaviness and kind of depression. Bruce Wayne would be depressed. I mean, that's a very sad character. And it's interesting the way that they handle him because he's not they're not playing all their cards right away, right? Like they're trying to make sure we have somewhere for these characters to go. They're giving them a character arc. So what I mean by that is some of these characters may seem not super likable early on. And at first, it was a bit abrasive for me until I started realizing, oh, you know what? They're giving these characters somewhere to start so that we can make them grow and take them somewhere else. So, for example, Harvey Dent, not a very likable character this time around, comparable to how he was in the original animated series. But he's not a complete jerk. He does have a sense of right and wrong. It's just buried under a lot of politics. Towards the end of the 10 episode run, you go, okay, maybe Harvey Dent's not as bad of a guy as I thought he was going to be. Definitely has some, demons he's wrestling with. And the performance by Diedrich Bader is, quite frankly, one of my favorite performances in this series. It's a very, very well voiced Harvey Dent. The design of the character is spot on, and I think they give him a really good character arc. What I don't love about this version is they kill Harvey Dent by the end of the 10th episode. So he ends up, giving his life for another character. So it's a redeeming moment, and I understand story-wise that's really great. It seems unfortunate to me to take a character like Two-Face and kill him by the end. And we already had that in the Christian Bale trilogy, right? So Two-Face dies in that series of films. And again, it just seems like a waste to me to take all this time to build and build and build up a character only to just to kill him off. It does make for a dramatic ending. I'm not going to say it's not good storytelling, but it seems like the mission of this animated series is less about let's just keep these characters alive and keep bringing them back, and more about let's just tell really dramatic stories. And sometimes people are going to die, and that's what they're doing. But back to Batman, it's not a replacement for Kevin Conroy, but for this version of Batman, this interpretation of the animated series, I think it works really well. And they make him kind of an unlikable, cold, walled off personality, which I think Bruce Wayne has always been that sort of way, but they really, really push it here. And I think the benefit of them doing that is we're finally going to get a sense of emotional pull when you really see that character start to warm up as these episodes continue. So they've already greenlit a second season. Maybe we'll see Batman start to warm up a little bit there. They do hint at it as he talks with Alfred, and Alfred says, "I've even seen you start to make friends." So you get the sense by the end of the 10 episode run that this Batman's going to have an arc, and we're going to be there with him as he goes from, depressed, moody, uh, shut in to maybe somebody who is more open to help and, his feelings opening up to other characters. Speaking of Batman and Alfred, I didn't love how they set things up as referring to Alfred by his last name almost through the entire 10 episode run. And it would have been something that I would have complained about more had they not adjusted it by the end of the 10th episode when Batman finally calls Alfred Alfred. And he does it in such a way as to go, okay, I'm letting go a little bit of this cold, um, keeping everybody at arm's length sort of behavior. He starts to let go of that a little bit, and for me, that was the kind of like the little calling card that said, you know what, this show knows what it's doing. It's trying something different, and it's going to make this more of a marathon and not a sprint, which I'm okay with. I'm okay with that. We got John DiMaggio, the voice of Bender from Futurama. We have him voicing Harvey Bullock, and I'm okay with it. I have a bigger problem with the writing of Harvey. They've made for me, Harvey used to be a jerk, but he was a likable jerk, and they've taken that character and just kind of made him a jerk. He's a dirty cop, and which is fine. I was okay with him being a dirty cop, but there's not really anything redeemable about him. So for me, that's one of those character changes where I'm not super in love with it, but you know, you're not going to love everything. Sometimes changes happen, and this was one of those changes. Moving on to some other voice actors, we've got Crystal Joy Brown as Barbara Gordon. Now, this is Barbara Gordon before she becomes Batgirl. And what's fantastic about this is they really have created a wonderful character in Barbara Gordon. She's a lawyer. She has a clear opposition to how the police are handling just Gotham in general, and that puts her at odds with her father, who's the commissioner. So they've got a really good tug of war happening there, and it looks to me like they're setting up a character who it's going to be fun watching her decide to become a vigilante at some point. She already has a big problem with the police and is trying to make sense of law and order and justice. So I'm really happy with Barbara Gordon. They've handled her very well. That brings me to Eric Morgan Stewart and his portrayal of Commissioner Gordon, which I love. I love the character design, and I think his voice is very well suited. The writing for the commissioner is really spot on. He's a man who is between a rock and a hard place, between trying to deal with a police force that he doesn't know if he can trust, and a mayor who is threatening him with essentially losing his job. And then you've got this Batman character in the background who's, causing some difficulty as well. So they've handled Commissioner Gordon very well. I'm gonna put one little caveat to that and say my big problem with this series. I know I was gonna save this for the end, but I feel like I have to say it now because I'm talking about some of these characters. My biggest problem with the series, and this is gonna sound kind of counter intuitive, but it's a period piece. If you're gonna do a period piece, in my opinion, You really should do your best to be historically accurate. Okay, it doesn't mean you can't take creative liberties, but there are some creative liberties in this series that go against it being set in the 40s. For example, having a black commissioner. I don't have a problem with there being a black commissioner in general, but having that in the 40s when that did not happen in real life America until decades later, that's a bit of a it's hard for me to watch the show and not notice things like that. Okay. So if they had set this series now in modern day and maybe they did a modern day noir or something like that, I would have no notes about any of that. But this show is doing a lot of inclusion, and I don't have a problem with inclusion. But again, if you're going to do inclusion and you're going to set it in a period of time when that wasn't happening, it's kind of a counter thing. It's a little bit of like erasing the past. And I'm just going to give you an example of another time where people have a problem with erasing the past. And that's a little film called Song of the South. Song of the South is a film that is kind of been buried by Disney because, it does this make believe world where slavery is not a bad thing or it's not the worst thing that could happen. And so, because of that, the film is looked at as being disrespectful because it doesn't properly show the struggles of the time. And I understand that. I don't think that means the film should be buried, just for the record, but that's another story. But I understand why there's concern around that film because it looks at an era of turmoil and pretends it wasn't really what it was. Well, the same thing could be said about Batman Caped Crusader. Pretending like there's going to be a prominent Asian psychiatrist, which, by the way, I know I'm jumping all over the board now. That's what they did with Harley Quinn in this show. They make her an Asian psychiatrist, not working at Arkham, and she flat out asks uh, Montoya, who is a Hispanic police officer. Now, she was, by the way, Montoya was a character in the original Batman the Animated Series, so that's nothing new. Having a Hispanic police officer, female for that point, in Batman, that's not a new thing. But making Harley Quinn Asian is, and making her gay is also new, and having her out on the street ask Renee Montoya to go out with her, that's a new thing. And then on top of that, when you go into that date, they actually have a date scene. Um, they kiss. Montoya and Harleen Quinzel kiss in a public restaurant in the 40s or the 30s, whenever this is being set. I'm just saying these kinds of things can be distracting when you're making a period piece. Had this been a modern era Batman, fine. I mean, if you want to change the race or change the sex or change the orientation, if you want to change any of those things and it's a modern spin, as long as the outcome is still a good story and it's still something that I feel is true to the spirit of the universe you're writing about, as long as those things remain, change your characters if you really want to. It's Are these choices I would have made? No, but they're not my characters, okay? And the version that I love, I can go back and watch or read them at any point in time, and that's fine. And Batman is one of the most open to interpretation characters. I mean, that world keeps getting reinvented. So for us to get angry at something being reinvented, it's ridiculous. You're going to have people take different um, takes on something like this. But if you do that and you're going to make changes, and then the new version is somehow not as good, Unfortunately, you're opening yourself up to scrutiny because you're gonna, as an audience, you're gonna say, what was wrong with the way that it was? It was working perfectly fine before, and now you've changed it, right? So that's kind of the slippery slope that reinventing a series involves. You have the potential for something great and something that takes risks and does something that you didn't expect, and that's wonderful. And also, if it doesn't land, you're gonna be scolded for ruining what wasn't broken before. We've got Bruce Timm working on the show, and that carries a lot of weight for Batman fans. You know, as somebody who was a major player in the original animated series, so having him on board is huge. But at the end of the day, you still have to have good stories, and you have to have characters that you want to watch. That doesn't change. So you can change a lot of things about stories and characters, but you can't change them being likable. Otherwise, people don't want to spend time watching. Okay, so since we're talking about, since I switched over to things that I don't like as much, let's talk about Harley Quinn again. Now, I love her new costume. I'm going to say that out the gate. Something I really, really don't like about Harley Quinn in this show is there wasn't any there wasn't really an origin. There wasn't like, if you're going to reinvent your characters, then I personally feel like you owe it to the audience to tell us why. You know, you got to show us an origin story. And unfortunately, yes, we do get her appearing just as a psychiatrist, Harleen Quinzel. We do get a little bit of that before we see her as Harley, but we don't see her getting pushed to any kind of emotional tipping point. Not really. They hint a little bit at her agitation when she's talking with Bruce, and she doesn't really believe her clients when they say they feel better. We get a little bit of that, but not believing your clients isn't the same thing as putting on a costume and holding them in a, you know, cell essentially, locked away in a house, and making them be humiliated or putting on strange outfits, or torturing them or anything like that. You got to have a motivation, and we just really weren't given a motivation for Harley Quinn. So while I love her new costume design, I'm not super sold on her voice, and I'm not a fan of the way they've written the character. There is no relation to her with Joker, so she is no longer, at this point in time, a thug, and so she's operating on her own. But if you're gonna make Harley Quinn a major villain by herself, I really have to stress that you got to give us more than just she's frustrated with her clients. Another thing I don't love about the show is that, and this is a tough one because back when the new Adventures of Batman, or the new Batman Adventures, back when that series came out, which was right after Batman the Animated Series, they're basically, part of the same universe. Just there was a different art direction. Um, the characters became very rigid and kind of robotic moving and very stiff once they went to the new Batman Adventures. For whatever reason, there's a bit of that happening in Caped Crusader. There's a bit of this like rigidity and coldness. It's not there all the time, but when it is there, it's just very, I don't know, like it doesn't evoke a lot of emotion. So that's a bit of a criticism I have. Some of the acting feels pretty robotic at times, especially with Batman. But again, I think they're trying to do something with Batman. I think they're trying to make him have an arc, and so I'm willing to give that a little bit of a pass. But obviously, we're not hand drawing on paper anymore for a Batman cartoon, and we were back in the animated series. So there's it. While it feels 1940s-esque and it feels noir. It also feels modern because it's so clean and crisp and precise that it winds up feeling cold. So that's something that I don't love, but thankfully this show makes up for it often enough that it doesn't plague the show terribly. It's just sort of like an underpinning, like a through line that I'll be sitting there watching and going, man, this feels really robotic. I really wish this didn't feel quite so robotic. And it happened throughout all 10 episodes. So I don't know if there's a way to fix that, but um, that's probably my least favorite part of it. Lastly, we got to talk about the Penguin. There's not a lot of things that I hate about this show, but the Penguin is one of them. Absolutely hate this character. They took a character that I genuinely enjoyed in the original animated series. Yes, they did a redesign for him back to his classic form for the new Batman adventures, and I guess they were going for something akin to that here, but they made the Penguin super tall and weirdly proportioned. They changed the sex of the character, so now Penguin's female and a lounge singer. I don't I don't know what to say. And she has a mothering sort of behavior with her henchmen. I guess they're her sons, but then in the pilot episode, she's okay with killing her sons, doesn't have any problem with it. She's not very intimidating. They tried really hard in the pilot episode to make her scary, or at least make the other characters worry that she's scary. I'm not buying it. The Penguin, I am not sold on the Penguin. And the biggest problem this series has for me so far was the pilot episode had my least favorite. Why would you have the Penguin have a giant umbrella inspired cannon? And so you've got this noir story that's taking itself very seriously, mixed with all of a sudden a weird, campy villain and a campy element. It just doesn't work. The pilot episode doesn't work for me in that way. It's very much that pilot episode is battling itself. The best thing about the pilot episode, if I had to give a little waxing positive, is you get to see Batman being Batman and creeping around and scaring thugs. That's really good. And then you get to blow up the police station at the end, which I mean, blowing up the police station at the end of a pilot is a pretty good way to say we are changing the way we do things in a Batman show. So, yay, there's some good points for the pilot. My favorite episode so far in this 10 episode run, I really loved episode 3, which I think was Kiss of the Catwoman. And then episodes 8, 9, and 10 were all just really solid and they played like they were one kind of unit. The second one with Clayface was really good. They did a uh, kind of a reimagined version of Clayface. They never actually call him Clayface, but it's him. And something I love about the way they're handling things on this series is they are showing alternate versions of villains that existed in the comics. So what I mean by that is in Batman the Animated Series, we got Matt Hagen as the voice or the character who becomes Clayface. And they went with the original comics character, Basil Karlo, for this version. So, they're going back to the roots of characters. They're giving us things we haven't seen before exactly. They're giving us different takes. And then they mix in villains from the 80s and villains from the early 2000s with onomatopoeia, a wide variety of characters that either those versions weren't what we got before, or we're getting characters we haven't had at all. And so I have to give them credit for that. So for as much as I hate the Penguin that they've created for us, I really like the way they've handled just about every other character. Catwoman especially, fantastic. Clayface was done really well. Gentleman Ghost is handled very well, and they, going into a bit of magic and spell casting into that episode. This is definitely a darker, more mature take on Gotham. It feels like the stakes are very real, especially with killing off Two-Face at the end. And I gotta say, there's a little bit of a teaser at the end of episode 10 for Joker. And probably the best thing that they could have done ever with the Joker was not make him sound like Mark Hamill. There's been Mark Hamill sound-alikes happening ever since the original animated series. And Mark did incredible work, but we need to let Mark's work be Mark's work and do different interpretations. And that is exactly what they do. This is a very creepy, quick glimpse at what Joker is probably going to be. And it gives me optimism because this show plays like an ongoing saga, kind of like the live action Gotham, and it's less episodic. I'm not saying that's better than the animated series. I'm just saying it's different. But those kinds of structural changes where you take it from, yes, it's a cartoon, but it's more mature, and now it's a continual story that, what happens in one episode will continue into the next, into the next. I think those are the kinds of changes that this series is going to benefit from. So overall, I've got positive things to say about Batman Caped Crusader. It's definitely not Batman the Animated Series. It's doing its own thing. There is uh, a lot of nodding to the animated series and nodding to the comics, maybe even more nodding to the comics than to the original animated series, other than the art style. Are there things I don't like? Yeah, there are some things I don't like, and that's going to happen on anything that you consume. Um, but it could have been a lot worse. It could have been a show that I said, don't even bother wasting your time with. And I'm not saying that. I would definitely give it a watch, even with the spoilers. If you hadn't seen the show yet, I would still give it a watch. It's worth your time. It feels like a serious crime drama. And while some people have complained that Batman doesn't make enough of an appearance in the show, I actually think that's a good thing because they're making Batman mysterious. We get to have Batman as a real detective in this show. I flipping love that. He feels more like a detective now than any version perhaps I've seen in film or television. And he really goes around analyzing and trying to find clues and information. And because he's a little hard to read, we don't quite know how far he's willing to go with things. And I will tell you the peak of that for me, where I was like, wow, this is definitely a different Batman, was Batman picking up a handgun and shooting 5 times, deliberately missing, at Detective Flass, shooting all around his head as a warning. 5 gunshots as a warning, right? The Batman that I grew up with would never so much as handle a handgun, would never touch the thing. And this version of him, he uses it for intimidation. He doesn't kill anyone or even wound them with it. He just mentally wounds them. Um, and then he looks at the gun with a real consideration before throwing it into Gotham Bay. And so what's great about that scene is you sort of get a sense of a character that is wrestling with his own sense of moral justice. Um, this is an early Batman. This is a Batman who uh, still gets whispered about on the streets. Not everybody knows who or what he is yet. And so he's still trying to figure out who and what he is. So for just a quick moment, he considers, gosh, like, can I use a gun? Is this something I want to incorporate? And he very deliberately, has a scornful look at this weapon before throwing it away. So I feel like in this show, while I was a little bit taken aback by them doing that, I feel better about it now because I realized that's the moment. It's not when Batman was a kid. It's not when Bruce was a kid that he decides he'll never touch a gun. It's this moment in this 10 episode arc where he goes a little too far and scares himself. Even though he was trying to scare Detective Flass, he ends up scaring himself. And I think that's a pretty critical character development moment. So, what I'm excited about for this show is some real drama, some real character development, and some interesting new interpretations of stories that I already love. I would be happy if they would maybe not shoehorn in so many changes. It feels a little bit like a checklist. Like, let's put all of the, you know, things that have changed in society since Batman last was on the air. Let's put all of those things into a Batman series. And maybe you think that's good, and everyone's entitled to their own opinion. That's fine. I'm just saying, for me, it rings a little bit hollow when it feels like a checklist. I'm not opposed to changing things, and I'm not saying they can't change the things that I've talked about today. But when you put all of them together and then you put it in the 40s, it it doesn't really mesh. So the less they lean into that, the better, in my opinion. If you want to do a more modern take on Batman and throw caution to the wind, I guess go ahead and do it. Uh, until then, until we see more Batman, I'm going to say definitely give this one a watch. Um, I think it's very interesting. It's nice to see a character still have so much longevity. These characters have been around for decades and they're still living on, and this is maybe a way to introduce them to another generation. So I'm excited. I hope to see some more great episodes, and I watched all 10 of them in the span of 2 nights. So that should tell you. I mean, granted, I wanted to do this review, but really I just wanted to watch what was going to happen next. So I was absolutely enthralled in seeing how things played out. And so hopefully you will be too. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. If you haven't already, I would really appreciate a like and subscribe on my channel. It really helps out quite a bit. And while you're visiting my channel, I would love it if you would check out Stay Tuned Presents Batman the Animated Series. It's one of my proudest achievements in life. I love this film. It means a lot to me. It was a chance for me to interview 17 people involved with what is, for my money, one of the greatest animated series of all time, including the late, great Kevin Conroy. And so it's a really special movie. I hope you check it out. And then I hope you check out Batman Caped Crusader. So thanks so much for watching this video. I hope it helped out a little bit and gave you some insight. Try not to judge something too harshly until until you get to the end of it. And then if you want to make your own judgments at that point, well, that's up to you. But, give things a chance. That's what I say. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.